Uh,
My mom texted me and said Jerry's running out there.
okay. Oops. Pause that.
Yeah, you guys started in August, right?
I forget. Yeah, it hasn't been too long. Like whenever, like I did Revelation last year. That took like a year because that was really intensive. And then when I got done with it, I realized that I changed a lot of my perspectives. It really. The more I studied, the more it made me rethink all of these other scriptures, because it relies so heavily on the rest of scriptures.
Yes.
So there's something like 800 references to the Old Testament in Revelation. What I'm doing now is not so much detailed and tedious. These are more big themes that develop throughout the Bible. So if you look at the Bible as a story, and like you go from Genesis on, and it's not just that you have a series of stories. It's just that it's also that there's a development there. So
Right.
Every big theme in the Bible starts in Genesis, and then it gives you sort of the seed of the idea, but then in the stories after that, you see the same theme, but it's expanded on, and the view gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and by the time you get to Christ, then everything makes sense a lot more. So what I'm doing is kind of going through these big themes. So the last theme that we started working on was exile. And so we'll be kind of skipping around in scripture, but usually it takes a while in Genesis, and then the rest of the scripture kind of like flows out of that pretty quickly, and we'll be skipping around a lot more.
Okay. Yes, I'm just learning about that, about the building on of the stories. You know what I mean? That they all lead to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. So like we did a thing like on the temple, but really what you find out is that the Garden of Eden was kind of a type of a temple, and it kind of gave you the framework for what a temple is, just because it's where God and people, it's that sacred space really where humanity lives with God. And
Yes.
that's something that gets developed. In fact, the Genesis is presented as sort of Genesis 1 is sort of presented as as God building a cosmic temple and then moving in and making his residence there with man as his image and as his priest and as his king, to rule the earth. And that how that gets ruined, but really by the time you get to the end of the Bible, then you get back to that
To the beginning.
priest again, whatever.
Yeah.
Hello, welcome back, Linan. Actually, if I think I'm going to try to rein everybody in here, and we'll get going.
Okay.
All right, you guys. Chris, Krista, Evan, Rachel, right? Yeah. I think we'll go ahead and get things started when you guys get in here. It's turning into a little community here, which is awesome.
More the merrier.
Yeah. Now I'm going to need to start putting up like a time clock, like Cottonwood does. Countdown. Do I have a volunteer today to open us up in prayer or anything? Anybody? Okay, Danny, go ahead. Thanks, yeah.
Something that can just completely change our thought and process draw us closer to you. Please help anybody who's trying to make it or is considering. So we hope that can learn more about it.
Amen, thanks.
Amen.
Let me get here on a screen share. And yep. So we're going to be going mostly in. We're going to be starting in Genesis 6 today. We're going to skip some parts, but we're going to end up in 11. So if you want to find those places in the Bible, also, and I'll have them up here on the screen. You guys can see that, right? On Zoom. So,
I can see.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can see the Genesis 6
Yeah.
there. And then I'll also be going to Isaiah 11 eventually. And if you look at the tabs there, Ezekiel 37, Deuteronomy 3. Some of the other ones, we'll see if we get there, but they're just kind of to make some side points. But just to kind of recap where we've been over the last couple of weeks. So Israel ends up in exile, of course, and when they come back out of exile after 70 years, they realize that Jerusalem's not the same, that their homeland's not the same. So even though they're back from exile, they know that it's not right, and from then on, they consider themselves in exile. They don't really look at their return to their homeland as a really real return from exile. All the way up until today, there's sort of an exile language in Judaism, you know. But they also started realizing that all of the material that they had from before the exile was really given to them in exile type language. Once they came back from exile, they started realizing a lot more what Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and all of the earlier books were really exile narratives. And so we see that and the fact that all of humanity is in exile. So it's the sort of feeling that, and I think it's the sort of feeling that everybody gets. We talked about a German word called Fernweh, which is a far sickness. It's almost like a homesickness for a place that you haven't even been to. And as the way that C.S. Lewis had described it, it's that kind of longing and tugging your heart even when you hear certain music or poetry or you think of things in your past. If you would go back there, you'd find out that it's not the thing itself, but that longing is still there, and that it's more of like the scent of a flower that we've never seen yet, or it's news from a home that we've never even been to. And we see this reflected all the way into the New Testament, with being exiles and walking in a foreign land. And the ironic thing is that, the earth, this is our home. God made man and put him in the garden, and it is supposed to be home. But even though we're here, it seems that we're not really welcome in this universe. And there's another German word called Angst. Something's not quite right. There was another German word I can't, which I'll get to later today. So Eden is a way, is the way things ought to be, but that we've never experienced. And what we see from Eden is that the sense of home ends up being a couple different things in the Bible. Jerusalem is home for Israel, but Eden is home for humanity. So Genesis 1 through 11 is really the story of humanity and humanity's exile. And then when you get to chapters 12 through the rest of Genesis, then you have the beginning of the story of Israel and their exile, right? So in Scripture, you have like these ideas that kind of map over each other, and so that idealized Jerusalem and the new heavens and the new earth and Eden are all sort of the same thing, and they become home. In fact, here's some parallels, okay? So let's take Eden and compare it to Jerusalem, right? So Eden is portrayed as a holy mountain, which Jerusalem is also portrayed as a holy mountain. So the banishment from the holy mountain is the exile, or the kicking out of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden is like the exile from Jerusalem. Exile is death. You know, God tells Adam and Eve, the day that you eat of the fruit, you shall surely die. But the same thing is that when they're kicked out of, when they're dragged out of Jerusalem, it's also a kind of death. And I'll give you an example of that. If you go to Ezekiel 37, this is during the exile. Okay, well, Ezekiel's looking at the exile here, but he's talking about the return from exile, and it's the story of the valley of dry bones. So it says here in verse 1, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the middle of the valley. It was full of bones. This is death. It's exile and it's death. And he led me around among them, and behold, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Lord God, you know. And then he said to me, prophesy over these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the word of the Lord to these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord. This isn't just that you'll know the Lord, that I'm the Lord just because I've brought you back from exile or I've brought you back into life. He's actually going to breathe his spirit into them, and they're going to know him, okay? So I prophesied, and as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a sound, and behold, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and behold, there were sinews on them, and flesh had come upon them, and skin had covered them, but there was no breath in them. So remember that word breath, okay? Spirits. It's that ruach. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, thus says the Lord God, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain, that they may live. And so I prophesied, and he commanded me, and the breath came into them, just the way that breath goes into Adam, you know, he comes to life. And they lived, and they stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost, and indeed cut off. We are indeed cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people. And I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I am God. See, I will place you in your own land. It's a return from exile, right? Then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it, declares the Lord. So it's back to some of that Eden imagery. Of course, it's, you know, the return from death back into the place that you belong. And if you go to Isaiah 11, we actually have a picture there where when you get to the new heavens and the new earth language, and it's really the restoration of Eden. It's the restoral and the renewal of all things, which is going to happen through Christ. New heavens and the new earth. It picks up on that holy mountain language all over again, and it describes things as they should have been. You know, like we talked about, like in Genesis, during the fall, that there was a death, not just a falling away from God, but what's the word? Sort of an alienation between you and other people, between Adam and Eve. All of a sudden, their relationship breaks down. The relationship between them and God breaks down, but also the relationship that they have with nature breaks down. And that gets even worse under Cain. He's told that he's going to be cursed from the land. And so he's even more separated from nature and more estranged. And so when you get to the new heavens and new earth, it's that reunion of not just man with God, but man with nature and to each other. So all of those things are restored here. So in that, so if you go to verse 10 in Isaiah 11:10, in that day, the root of Jesse. Okay, Jesse was King David's father. Okay, so it's talking about David here. The root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. In that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet for a second time to recover the remnant and the remains of his people. So it's talking about that. But let me go back here. Okay. And what you have is that you have, well, let me just get into it. Verse 1, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. Remember last week when we talked about the exile of Nebuchadnezzar, and he had that dream where he was chopped down? It's that king language again, where you have a king who's represented as a tree. This time you have a tree that is the line of David, but it has been cut off. They've lost it, and they know that that's not right. So they're expecting a Messiah to come from that, but it's also part of the exile, right? It's all exile language. This is how it all ties together. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. It's a tree that's been cut down, and a branch from its root shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. This is the Messiah. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, and the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. Remember, Christ only did what he saw the Father do. Mm-hmm. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. So this is the restoration of the King of Israel, right? Now here you get to the new heavens and new earth language. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together. And the little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy. And in all my holy mountain, there you go again, in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters covered the sea. It's the return to Eden. It's the return to Jerusalem. But it's gone forward into the new heavens and the new earth. So we have the estrangement from God, from each other, from ourselves, and from nature, but all of this is restored here. So we saw in Genesis 1 that exile was death, and that Ezekiel, dry bones, was death. And we got all the way to the the point where Noah is born, and we saw that. So let's pick it up here in Genesis 6. This is right before the flood, okay? And what God is doing here is showing you what happens before the flood, how bad things get. So, and it's really what we're going to see is that it's a corruption on the earth, but it's not just man, okay? Here we have a spiritual and a human fall, and they're interlinked together. So when man began to multiply on the face of the land, I'm here in Genesis 6:1, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any that they chose. This is one of the, to a lot of people, one of the strangest passages in the Bible, because you're going, wait a minute, who are these sons of God? And sometimes it's been, interpreted as the sons of Seth. But as you're going to see, it doesn't even make sense, because Seth is, why would they have children that are giants or Nephilim? It doesn't make sense. So, and we're gonna explore this when we do our series on spiritual beings and the heavenly council, the watchers, and the Elohim, which is the gods or small gods. It's actually spiritual beings, or some people will interpret it as angels. So most people would think of this as angels, okay, the sons of God. And the way I understand this, I think the best explanation that I've heard is that, do you remember when in Ezekiel, it talked about the sons of the prophets, right? It doesn't mean the offspring of the prophets. It means those that are in the category of the prophets, right? It's the sons of means that you belong to a certain a class or a certain group, right? The sons of God here, it's not God, Elohim, the word Elohim can be a title for God, but it can also be a word that's plural for God, small g. That these are creatures. God, Yahweh made them, but they're also but they're on His heavenly council, and they ruled. These are, Paul later talks about these as principalities and powers, and they're also referred to as holy ones and people on the Elohim on His council. But what you see here is that you have a rebellion, and if you go to Jude, it actually mentions this. Now, there's a book that's not in the Bible, and we don't have it. There's no Christians that have this in their Bible except for a part of the Ethiopian church, right? It's the Book of Enoch. But if you read the Book of Enoch, or the first part, you would get kind of the story of this whole thing. And the strange thing about the Book of Enoch is that it actually gets quoted a couple times in the New Testament. It was a later book. It was shortly before I think maybe it is in the Second Temple period at some time, so before Christ. But it was already part of the understanding there. And the understanding was that what's going on in Genesis 6 is that you have who were called these Elohim, who were called the Watchers, who left the heavenly abode and what they were, their realm that they were supposed to stick to. They actually have the ability or the technology or just they're able to reproduce with humans, and they have children who become these giants, okay, or the Nephilim. And so in Jude 1, there's a reference here. It says, now I want, Jude 1, verse 5, it says, now I want to remind you, although you were once fully knew it, that Jesus, let me see. Where am I?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Verse 6 here. And the angels who did not stay within their own positions of authority, but left their proper dwelling, okay, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities. There's another, so there's kind of like part of that story there, that their punishment was to be held in chains in Hades or someplace, okay? Second Peter tells you a bit more specifically what happens there. It says here in Second Peter 2, and I'm in verse 4, it says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell," it says here, but it's a Greek word Tartarus. It's kind of, that was supposed to be the darkest, most dungeony place in Hades, okay? I think that it might be equated to the bottomless pit. I'm not sure. But he committed them into chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the time of judgment. So so back here in Genesis 6, something happens with them, but God actually, he's grieved by all of this. So we have a dual fall, not a fall, but a worsening of what's going on. So here in verse 3, I'm back in Genesis 6, verse 3. "Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide with man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." In some versions, it'll say heroes. So these were thought, in later sort of mythology, they got construed to be sort of like, the Titans, half god, half human, giants, heroes, that sort of thing. We'll get a lot more into this when we do that other series. But anyway, verse 5. "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention and the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot man from whom I have created from the face of the earth, the land, and animals, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens. For I am sorry that I have made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So he's going to, the waters that he separated in Genesis 1, he's going to, and made order out of chaos. Again, he's going to allow that to collapse to a degree back into chaos, and he's going to kind of come out the other end with humanity 2.0. So we have the flood, and I'm not going to go too much into the flood story. But the flood subsides, and it's just a note here that when the flood subsides, that Noah and the beasts and the animals and all that were saved, and this is a remnant, right? They end up on a mountain, on a high mountain. So the same way that Eden is a high mountain, now you have a restart again on a mountain. It's a high place. And he gives them a covenant, and there's a couple things here, that he's going to, he's promises that he's not going to flood the earth again, but he makes sort of a one-side covenant where he doesn't really require anything from humanity or from Noah. He just makes a promise that he's not going to do this to humanity again, because he knows where humanity is going to head. They're going to continue their downward trend. So Genesis 9, you have the covenant, and then you have the nations that descend from Noah. Let's go to Genesis 11, okay? Now you remember, in Eden, when they were exiled, an angel was put to the east, because they're exiled to the east. Okay, it's a big deal in scripture and prophecy about the movement towards east, because east is where Babylon is. Okay, east is where Babel is. So Cain, he moves to the east. and now we have the Tower of Babel. So now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated, here it says from the east, but in some other translations like the NASB, it says here when they journeyed east. Right. So I think there might be a little bit of ambiguity. You've had a little bit of a split there, but but I think that if you think about the narrative that Scripture is trying to portray with the movement towards Babylon, I'm pretty sure that the movement towards the east is meant here. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Now, Shinar, later in Scripture, it gets equated with Babylon. They said to one, it's just the plain that Babylon lays in. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. This is technology at the time, you know. They said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach to the heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Think about that. Otherwise, we're going to be scattered. They're thinking in a sense that like they don't want to be scattered. Okay, they're starting to think that that being scattered in some sort of sense is too much of an exile. Okay, now remember Cain, he's told that he's going to be a wanderer on the earth, and then you get just a verse or two down, and it says that he settles. And you're thinking, wait a minute, how is he a wanderer? But he settles, and in the place is called Nod. So, and Nod means wandering, or to wander, right? So he settles in a place called Wander, and then he actually even builds a city. So here's kind of like where exile has already happened on humanity. They're trying to not wander. And even though Cain is in a city, he's still a wanderer. You know, like I said, cities are full of people who are wanderers and who are living their lives in exile. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they began to do. Now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Here's how I read it. Okay, they've come this far, they've done this, and actually this is a very rebellious act. This is about them making a name for themselves, okay? They're making a tower to reach God, but it's sort of a tower before God. It's in the face of God, okay? And it's a ziggurat, which what you would do is that you would build a ziggurat next to a temple, a big tower. This is what the pagans used to do. And then they would try to get the gods to come down and meet them on their own terms. So verse 7, it says, come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. In other words, wait, let me back up. So in other words, it's kind of like, if they've gone ahead and do this, there's no end to the evil that they're going to do. This is going to be a bad situation. And God, in his mercy, is actually going to split them up. This is not just about covering the earth, all right, which he commanded Adam and Noah to do. This is about breaking up a collection of people. Now, here is where I need to kind of introduce what the concept of Babel is, or Babylon, okay? Now, in English, there's kind of like, it makes it sound like two words, you know. It's actually just, it's the same word. Babylon is Babel. So if you look in Hebrew, it says here for Genesis 11, and, you know, it was called Babel, right? This is Babel. This is, or it's actually pronounced Babel, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but then if you look at, you know, later on during Kings and other parts of the Bible, it is Babylon. It's the same word. So Babel is Babylon. Babylon, of course, to the Jews becomes it becomes a symbol of oppression, power over you, oppressive, and oppressive king, really more like an oppressive system too. Okay, one of the best, but it's also, and this is one of the best kind of like phrases that I heard to describe what Babel is, and that is that it's man's organization against or without God. Okay, so it's man in his organization against or without God. It's the so, huh?
The world system.
It's world system. So if you think about the fall of Adam and Eve, and they don't, and you know, they decide what's good and evil for themselves. You have them pitted against each other, and we all experience that I have my idea what's right and wrong, and so do you, but now we can't agree on a lot of things. Well, God designed people to be in communion with each other. So in a sense that you could say, well, yeah, man is supposed to be in communion with each other. The problem is, though, that when they organize and they say, okay, we need to stick together and have unity, it can be good, but it ends up being bad because it's not it ends up being bad without God in the picture. When you have the people of God, it becomes koinonia, right? It's like you're what sticks you together is God, right? When you take God out of the equation, it becomes Babylon. And even you're going to see later on, even Jerusalem ends up, when they fall out of communion with God, they end up becoming Babylon too. So, you know, we're supposed to be together and we have a relationship, but when man organizes together without God, it becomes kind of like, it becomes an evil power, okay? And it's in hand with the spiritual powers. So, another German word, I told you I was going to get a third one, zeitgeist, right? So how would you the spirit of the times, right? Let me expand that a little bit more. It's like the spirit of the times, but it can also be like the spirit of a community, a collective, right? Sort of like, I don't know, you know, but you see where I'm going. Maybe that's getting beyond the term zeitgeist, but it's the spirit of, you know, like you look at our political situation today, there's a zeitgeist there, okay? And you might have two going on or whatever, but there's like, but if you take it away from the guidance of God, you're going to end up with chaos, and you're going to end up with some kind of an oppression, or something's going on there. You see it again and again and again in history. And one of the worst things that you can imagine is that if I'm in a town and you know, town and city has, you know, decided together to do a bunch of stuff, and they become corrupt, or when they become corrupt, you can get away from that city. You can go, I'm going to go move to this other town. It's a little bit more innocent there. It's run a little bit better. If that state becomes corrupt, now you're going to have to move out of that state, and you're going to be like, well, let me go to this other state and things are going to be better. But what if that country becomes corrupt? Well, you might still be able to make it to another country if they let you in or whatever. But if you end up with the entire world under one government and one force, and everybody's together, and you have a world Babylon system.
Yep.
Where do you run to? You know? I'm sorry?
Elon Musk is giving 4 years. You have your march.
Yeah, Elon Musk says, give him 4 years and you'll go to Mars. Yeah, okay. I know, right? Yeah, that's, you know, like, let's, you know, move me to the moon first, you know, like, where are you going to go? But, you know, that's pretty funny. Yeah. But, you know, so you get the idea that, you know, yeah, there's more unity, and people think of like, say, like a world government or something like that as a big kumbaya moment where everybody's getting along in peace and harmony, and imagine there's no borders and no religion too. Well, think about that line, you know, you're going to do this without God. You know, good luck with that. That's the ultimate Babylon. And many people think that that's what you're looking at in Revelation, and ultimately, you know, it's not a good thing. When Christ comes back, yeah, you're going to have a different kind of world government, but that is where you have a united under God again, and that is the new heavens and the new earth, you know?
We also see Genesis 4 and 6, how the last time somebody went and built a city, they started settling there with Cain, who lived in that. And Lamech, by the time it gets to Lamech, it's like 70 times 7, because of the balance of murder.
Yeah, so let me rephrase that. So in Genesis 4, you see Cain making a city, and then let me so and then you see, you know, like, you know, where, you know, a bunch of people are gathered together organizing without God, and then you get the, and then you have the story of Lamech, and it just shows you that he's become even much more corrupt than Cain. You know, like where, you know, like he thinks that like if God is going to, if Cain is avenged 7 times, that he's avenged 77, you know, 70 times 7 times, and he's bragging about basically his murderous attitude, and he's collecting wives like cattle, and he's just, you know, so there's the downward spiral, you know.
And since Genesis 5's genealogy kind of parallels that, Lamech was also right before Genesis 6. And by that time, the word used for violence is hamas, which is just like extreme violence. You know, so it's not just, you know, somebody hitting somebody. It's hamas, like terrifying.
Yeah, it's a different word there in Genesis.
So he's preventing that from even possibility.
Yeah, it becomes extreme violence, and that's what God is preventing here, or giving respite from, actually, you know. So what happens here is that you have the exile of Babel, or the exile of Babylon themselves. It's like he basically scatters them, and if you think about their scattering, I'm not going to go too much into this, you know, but if you go to Deuteronomy 32, and you go to Deuteronomy 32:8, okay? And I'm going with the ESV here, and I'll explain why. It says here, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, and when he divided mankind, when did he divide mankind? He divided mankind in Babylon, in what we just read, right? Genesis 11, okay? So this is the setting. When he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the numbers of the sons of God. Okay, some of you might have the sons of Israel, or this, you know, but but that's from the Masoretic text, which is really, Masoretic text is what, between up to 900 AD. Yeah, so it's later. If you look at the Septuagint, which is earlier, and especially the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says the sons of Elohim, right? And who were the sons of Elohim? The sons of Elohim, like we saw in Genesis 6, are the spiritual beings, you know, that got, you know, they're angels, or they become gods or whatever. So what this is talking about, it looks like, okay, is that when he divided up the nations, he divides them up to the numbers of the Elohim. He divides them up among the Elohim. These become the gods of the nations, basically. That's the picture here, okay? But here's the catch, okay? But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. So if you go back here to Genesis 11, is that, okay, Genesis 11, basically here in verse 9, it says, he scatters them across the face of the earth. You have the descendants. And then the next story, when you get to Genesis 12, is the story of Abraham. For some reason, it's not loading. But anyway, you can look it up yourself. So it's the story of Abraham. So the picture here is sort of a parallel, right? He divides the nations up. He disinherits the nations, and he puts them under the jurisdiction, basically, of these spiritual beings that are sort of become the gods of the nations. Now, it's not like the people believe erratic things about them, and sometimes they've got partially true ideas about it, but also a lot of false ideas about it. So I'm not going to say that like every idol it was like one of the sons of God or anything like that. But the seed of the idea is looks to be true, that there is that those nations were subject to them. But God's got a plan, because what he does is that he says, I'm going to make my own nation here. And what he does is he starts with Abraham, and that's what Israel is going to be. Now, through Israel, he carries it forward all the way to Christ. And then what Christ does in the end is that the message starts being that you don't have to be under these gods, because Christ is all power and all authority. All of these kingdoms are handed to Christ. You can be part of his kingdom no matter where you live. And again, this is we're going to cover that more in detail in the future as well. But that's where we're going to leave off today, and because this is the end of the general story of man, and we'll be skipping a lot more through scriptures to kind of like to develop the idea of exile. Next time, we're going to see how exile is. It happens because of God's judgment, but it also happens to good people, like Joseph. Joseph ends up in exile, and you get a new idea introduced that the righteous end up in exile too. But God uses it for his glory, and to the good of the people who are in exile. And that carries all the way into the church, where we are exiles on the earth, scattered people, walking around like strangers in a foreign land. But God uses us to spread his kingdom all over the world. So that's it for today.
Thank you.
Okay, we got a question here. Yeah, no, go ahead. No, that's your question.
This is kind of offline.
Uh-huh.
Before Job had his trial, test, whatever, it starts off with the sons of God.
Mm-hmm.
That was on a certain day they came to present themselves.
Yeah.
Satan came with it. Now, of course, you don't surprise God, but he didn't ask him, "What are you doing here?" He just asked him, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Right. Is that something that, with Satan? I don't know what. So what? So like at the beginning of Job, before the Lord, right. Satan also came with him. Yeah. So the question is kind of like in Job, where you see the heavenly council and the Elohim basically get together. What is Satan doing there? Basically, yeah. Okay. It just. He's all over the place. We know that. Right. He's the prince of the air. But what? So don't go in a lot of detail of why he was there. The Lord just asked him, "You consider my servant Job?" I guess he just. So not kicked him out of heaven at that point. Oh yeah. So the question is, what was Satan kicked out of heaven at that point? I think that we have sort of an idea, and like where first of all that Satan is kicked out of heaven at the beginning, right? But there's no proof of that. What we have is we have Revelation 12, but when we see, if you go to Revelation 12 and you, what is he doing there? Well, what's he doing there? But it's actually the title there in Job is the accuser. Okay. Now, some scholars, and this is kind of like half and half, okay? Some scholars feel that this is just a member of the heavenly council whose job it is to be the prosecutor, okay? Other people think this is Satan, but that is also his job to be the prosecutor. And I think that either way you look at it, by the time you get to Revelation 12, and let's go to...
But it had to be Satan because God said, you know, you can do this and don't do that. So, and then Satan went and, you know, first he started off with the when he killed his children first, you know.
Okay, I'll agree with you that I think it's Satan the character, but the term that you have in English, you know, it says and Satan was also there, but the term there is the accuser was there. Okay,
who's the accuser?
That's the accuser. So when you get to or let me see. So let's go to Job actually.
Because Peter, one time, you know, he told Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Well, you know, Peter wasn't Satan, but his mentality at the time. And so, was it actual, or it was just?
What's the word for in Peter where it says "Get thee behind me, Satan"?
Well, just a transliteration there.
It's probably which is accuser, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And not agree. By the time you get to the New Testament, they like have developed a name for him.
So
Old Testament doesn't, or at least in earlier Jewish thought, like presupposition, they haven't.
Job 1:6. Okay, let me look at the Hebrew concordance here. Okay, Job. If you go to Job. Oh, by the way, guys, you can just look this up online. Just Job 1. 1:1. Whoops. Job 1:6. Okay, so here. Okay, so it says here, before to present themselves God alone, sons, when he came a day, and there was amongst them Satan, the Satan, or Hasatan, right? Hasatan, you look up the word, well, it's giving you like the, Hasatan, what's the literal, it means the accuser. Yeah. But it just doesn't show this in the...
Translating it like as a proper name when they translated it to Septuagint.
Okay. So, but here, let me show you this. Okay, you go to Revelation 12. This is kind of like one of those things that I really had to start thinking about. It says, you know, it's the story of the woman and the dragon. And okay, so now a war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. So they lose their place in heaven. Some people think, well, it's kind of like it's their place it's their place with God, but it's also their place in the heavenly council, if you think about it, okay? And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, which is the accuser, right? It's the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come down, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. So he's been an accuser in heaven before he's been thrown down at this point, okay? Who accuses them day and night before our God, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. If you look at where this is in the story, it says, if I go back to maybe like verse 4, his tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven, cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she was placed. She had a place prepared to God by God, where she's going to be nursed for 1,260 days or 3.5 years. Okay. Now war arose in heaven. It doesn't tell you when this war is, but it's the accuser that accuses the brethren day and night, which is kind of like makes it sound like that we had up until some point, or that we will have up until some point, an accuser who was thrown down from heaven along with the host. Now, I've had two thoughts about this. Okay, one is that this happens at the crucifixion and Christ when he receives all authority, because once you have Christ and we can appeal to him as our defense lawyer, what's an accuser going to do anymore? It's like there's no use for an accuser. But you see an accuser in Job, and I think that it's the accuser there. So I don't, whether Satan had his abode or something like that, or always lived in the heavens. We know that he's, God asked him in Job, like, where have you been? He's like, I've been going around the earth, seeing this and that,
Oh, that's right. He did ask him. Yeah, that's right. Before he said, where have you been?
Yeah.
Walking
So
to and fro.
you're walking to and fro
Yeah,
now.
he
So
took
like
him out
maybe it's not as if he like lives in heaven or something like that, but he's, I don't know.
Now,
But the place in heaven, he still had a place there in the heavenly council, and he's named the accuser. So it's kind of like he accuses man before God. It's kind of like this. You know how like in politics, like you will meet with your enemy. It's like, because you're dealing with a dignitary. It's not even though that person is an enemy of your state or your country, the leaders are still meeting face to face, and there's still discussion going on, and it's because they're treated as dignitaries. Okay, and this is another thing that like Jude brings up. You can go there, and he's saying that people just start slandering the spirits, like. But even Michael the archangel didn't bring it, like wasn't saying slanderous things to Satan himself, but he just said the Lord condemn you, or I forget what the word there is, but there's still like a certain there's still a certain treatment of this accuser as a dignitary of some sort, even though he's fallen, he still has a position. That's the picture I get,
Yeah, he's the king of the earth.
Yeah, he's the king of the earth. He actually has a power, and he has an authority, and the same thing with these other powers and authorities, and
He could tempt Jesus in the desert.
yeah, exactly. How can he tempt Jesus in the desert and say, I'm going to give you all these kingdoms? He's a ruler and he's a dignitary.
do you consider this synonymous?
Hmm.
You just read he swept the third of the stars. Right?
Uh-huh.
And when he fell, how many angels did he take with him? 1/3.
Yeah, it says a third.
Do you find that synonymous, or is that?
Yeah, I think there's it seems like there's a third there. Now it could be a symbolic number. I'm not sure, but again, what you see is that on one, like when we just looked at Genesis 6, right? We saw that there were sons of God that did their thing, and they get held in Tartarus. But obviously, not all of them get held in Tartarus, because not all of them rebelled at the same time, and they didn't all do the same things. So you have the picture is that you have a hierarchy, layers, and they're independent beings. They're like humans. They have the opportunity to decide decide for themselves if they're going to eat of the fruit of good and evil, so to speak, you know, that they're going to call good and evil on their own account, or are they going to do it with God? So if you go to, let's go to Psalm, yeah, and I think Psalm 82 really kind of like ties it, gives you a clear picture that it's not just like, oh, boom, you guys messed up and you're out of here now. They actually kind of get oh wait, Psalms 83, right? What am I thinking? Psalms, I thought it was Psalms 82, Psalm 82. The, you are God's. Oh yeah, here, Psalm 82. So God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment, or in the midst of the Elohim, he holds judgment. How long, he's saying to the Elohim, right? He's saying, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right and of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All of the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are God, sons of the Most High God, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. And we have that prince language also in Daniel and some other places, you know, that these are rulers, you know. Yeah, he's given them a warning. Yeah, so when it says here, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. What it's saying is that arise, O Yahweh, and it's talking about Christ actually judging the earth because he's going to inherit the nations. You know, ultimately that's what that means, because all authority is going to be given to the Messiah. Yeah.
Since he was born with his father, it
They what?
Jesus is one with his father, so it doesn't.
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
Jesus, it's all the same.
Yeah. There's that's, boy, that's another theme that we could do, is about like God and that like names and positions. Yeah, that Jesus, that there's like a Yahweh, you know, like Isaiah, what is it? He shall be called 50, yeah, Isaiah 54, I think.
By the way, as far as like the, is it present or past tense? Even in Revelation 12, you get the accuser when he's talking. I mean, you see it in English, but you get it shown in Greek too. It's like, by the way, this guy that currently is accusing our brother in day and night, he has been past tense thrown down. You know, so
okay.
both are happening in the same sentence. You know,
Yeah.
He's the one currently accusing, but he's also the one past tense thrown down. And by the way, how do they overcome him? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony.
Okay, so Evan is saying that, like, if you look at the tenses in Revelation 12, is kind of like it's the playing around with tenses that, you know, like it's past tense that he's throwing down, but it's also present tense. You know, that he's still accusing. Right. Yeah. So they overcame him. He accuses them day and night, and they overcame him. It's like, okay, is this present or past tense? That's interesting. What am I? Huh? Oh yeah. Satan got exiled, right? Big time exile in Revelation 12. What am I thinking? Isaiah 45, huh? No, he shall be called Wonderful Counselor. Huh? No, I'm way off. What am I doing?
It's in the earlier chapters.
Oh, until a child was born. Yeah, right. You know, the people walked in the So where am I? For until a child is born, Isaiah 9:6. To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. That's it's Yahweh there, right?
No,
Or is it Elohim?
it's Leon's.
Huh?
El Gabor.
El Gabor.
It's El. It's like, which is a specific phrase used in Deuteronomy, I want to say.
It's a specific
Or
phrase.
Exodus. And then, it refers to, it's used only like once or twice, and it's only talking about Exodus.
Right. But think of it. Mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So it's talking about the Son, but he's the mighty God, the Father, and Prince of Peace. You know, it's and you're going, wait, did the writer just screw up? Like they forget what they just put down, or what? You know, a child is born. You know, like how can it be the Father and Prince of Peace, and this is sounding like Yahweh, and you know, and the answer is yes. You know, it's incredible. You know, like you get this over and over again. So right, yeah. Verse 7 of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end on the throne of David, and over his kingdom to establish it and uphold it. So it's David is his father, you know, with justice and righteousness. Yeah. Well, you know, so anyway, we're rabbit trailing now, but it's fun. So, I better hang. My battery's about to die on here, so I think we'll see you guys next week, and hope you got something out of it.
It was good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
See you later.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
I want to know a little,
Mhm.
from the difference in Exodus 3.